Imagine a people who believe they did not simply lose their land, they watched it vanish beneath the waves, a civilization whose history begins not with conquest or glory, but with catastrophe, where memory clings not to monuments, but to what the sea has swallowed. For the Tamil people, the ocean isn't just geography, it's a character, a force, a destroyer, and a silent witness. It is taken from them again and again, in floods remembered not as allegory, but as origin. In this video, we explore Katal, the ocean's devouring of the Tamil homeland, and how it shaped one of the most poignant cultural responses to loss in world history. From the submerged lands of Kumari Kandam to the poetic defiance of modern Tamil thinkers, we'll uncover how this memory of destruction powers a deep, devotional retelling of Tamil identity. Here, loss isn't just something to recover from, it's something to hold on to, because for many Tamilians, the past drowned, but it didn't disappear. This is not just a myth, it's not just an old story whispered across generations. It's a radical form of memory, one that reimagines loss, not as defeat, but as destiny. The principal term used to designate the catastrophic and destructive agency of the ocean in Tamil devotion's labors of loss is Katal, a word that has attained the same status among its placemakers that was accorded to the deluge, or the flood, in the discourses of the Judeo-Christian West, well into the early decades of the 19th century. Literally, seizure by the sea, Katal is frequently glossed in English as flood, ocean swell, and significantly as deluge, or even deluge. All of Tamil devotion's ocean fears and fantasies turn around this word, which is used, over and again, to describe the actions of the cruel sea in its labors of loss. It is because of Katal that Tamil speakers irrevocably lost their patrimony, as embodied in their antediluvian words and works as these had been nurtured in their ancestral homeland. Instead of sustaining Tamil homes and hearths today, their patrimony lies consigned to a watery grave at the bottom of the Indian Ocean. But just as consequential for the politics of the present, because of Katal and its disastrous consequences, today's Tamil speakers had also lost the material evidence to convince others that Tamil is an antediluvian language, the world's most ancient at that. Not surprisingly, as early as 1901 Savariroyan lamented, "So completely has the deluge done its destructive work that we hardly come across in South India such old manuscripts and libraries as confront the gaze of antiquarians and explorers in Nineveh and other ancient Chaldean towns. Most tragically of all, vast stretches of inhabited Tamil territory, Natu, resonating to the sound of Tamil, were forever submerged, leaving Tamil speakers confined today to a small piece of land on the Indian mainland. No wonder the consequences of Katal are catastrophic, a characterization that appears in its English guise as early as the 1890s and continues to reverberate through the course of the next century. As the Tamil placemaker labors in grief over the loss of his antediluvian homeland and his ancestors. As the literateur Nalasami Pillai noted many decades ago, explicit discussion of Katal appears for the first time in the learned commentary on Aphorism 1 in an ancient grammar of love poetry called Irayanar Akaparul, also known as Kalavial, and believed to have been authored by the Lord Siva himself. Generally attributed to Nakirar, this commentary, dated unstably to the later centuries of the first millennium CI, offers the first tentative sketch of an antediluvian land in which Tamil had flourished for 8,140 years under the patronage of Pandya kings in academies, Kandam, established first in the city of Tenmaturai, and then in Kapatapuram, both of which were subsequently seized by the ocean. As a consequence, all the literary creations of the 4,449 poets of the First Academy, which flourished for 4,440 years, and the 3,700 bards of the Second, which lasted another 3,700 years, were washed away, before a third was established in post-diluvial, or northern Madurai, of the present. Nakirar's commentary, however, does not directly allude to the loss of land accompanying the loss of these literary academies and their learned productions. This followed a few centuries later when Adiyarkunalar wrote his commentary on the Tilapatikaram. Adiyarkunalar's commentary supplements Nakirar's details of antediluvial literary losses with territorial losses as well, as it notes that a stretch of land extending to a distance of 700 kavatam, and divided into 49 territories, Natu south of Cape Kumari, was swept away by the ocean. Two other ancient anthologies refer to the catastrophic consequences of the ocean's wrath. Scattered verses in the Purana Nuru and Kalitokai hint that the cruel sea invaded the Pandyan domain and seized land, and that when this happened, the Pandya king compensated his loss by seizing the equivalent amount of territory from his neighbors, the Sera and the Chola. And in medieval commentaries on ancient texts such as the Tolkappiyam by scholars like Ilampuranar, Nachanarkiniyar, and Parasiryar, there are stray allusions to an antediluvian land south of Cape Kumari that was subsequently seized by Katal. Modern Tamil labors of loss around Kumari Kandam are anchored in this limited but telling corpus of antique words and verses. These ancient texts and their medieval commentaries were published for the first time in the closing decades of the 19th century, after being lost for more than 100 years to the living memory of the Tamil reading public. Soon after, the labors of loss that I have been detailing in these pages commence in the Tamil country. In the process, they repeatedly turn to these archaic and oblique allusions to the ocean's mischief. But they do so with a crucial difference that points to the very modernity of these labors of loss. Nowhere do the ancient poems or their learned commentaries mention that the land seized by the ocean was a whole continent, Kandam, nor do they mention the name of the land, let alone bestow upon it the scientific toponym of Lemuria, or even Kumari Kandam, or Kumarinatu. Most crucially, there's no attempt to link the loss of land or of Tamil books produced in the antediluvial academies to the history of the Tamil people as a community or an emergent nation. Yet, within a few years of the publication of these ancient works for the first time, in the closing years of the 19th century, all this is asserted, as Tamil's devotees conjure up a new place world out of these archaic allusions to lost academies, lost books, and lost territory, facilitated by the paleo-scientists' speculations about Lemuria, which had begun to circulate by then in the Madras Presidency. So, here is Savariroyan in 1901, confidently invoking tradition to advance some really novel claims. The old tradition preserved to this day in some of the classical works such as Silapatikaram and Irayanar Akaporal locates the beginning of the cultivation of Tamil in the hoary past. The tradition asserts that there was a great continent contiguous with South India covering the large portion of the Indian Ocean to the south of Cape Comorin, and it was the seat of a civilized nation and of a powerful dynasty for many centuries from very remote times. That the capital of the dynasty was the seat of an assembly of learned men, first at South Mathurai, Tenmaturai, second at Kapadapuram or Alavai, and the assembly of literati at South Mathurai is known as the first Sangam, and that at Kapadapuram as the second, and that there occurred then a great inundation which washed away the vast extent of land stretching from Cape Comorin southwards, with all the literary productions of the time. The fact that a vast land existed south of Cape Comorin and was submerged by the flood receives great support from the modern sciences, geology, and natural history, which prove the existence of a land south of India and its disappearance beyond the pale of doubt. That tradition concurs with the modern sciences, geology, and natural history on the matter of the inundation of the antediluvial Tamil land and its subsequent loss. It is this concurrence that allows Tamil placemakers to move seamlessly and effortlessly between literary allusions to Katal and loss of territory on one hand, and scientific findings regarding land submergence on the other. Numerous sources feed Tamil devotion's ocean fears and fantasies and its dread of Katal. In addition to the ancient poetic anthologies whose occasional verse carried memories of the sea's wrath, religious legends from the first millennium CE speak of frequent floods that threatened old cities such as Madurai, which were then subsequently saved by divine intervention. Oral traditions handed down the generations by fisherfolk lament the loss of life and limb to the cruel sea, as they recall with wonder stories of submerged palaces and temples that they had heard. In the everyday life of the Tamil country, rumors about the disappearance of built structures in coastal towns like Mahabalipuram actively intermingle with historical accounts of the vanishing of ancient ports such as Korkai and Pumpuhar. And then there are the graphic eyewitness reports of those who lived through the fierce cyclones that periodically hit the Coromandel coast, destroying both life and property as well as washing away land, the most talked about in recent memory being the inundation and disappearance of the temple town of Dhanuskodi in December 1964. From the early years of the 19th century, the colonial state assiduously catalogued all such oceanic activities in its district reports and manuals, its gazetteers and scholarly tomes, and so too, have the post-colonial governments of the region. Not surprisingly, in such a context, metropolitan science's labors of loss around submerged lands find ready accommodation and indeed have been welcomed, for they are deemed to offer material proof for what Tamil speakers had known all along, from the time of their antediluvian ancestors, about the ocean's fury. As one of them insisted, no one can reasonably be a skeptic as regards the flood in the face of such overwhelming evidence. The Tamil placemaker may dread Katal, but it is also discursively critical, indeed necessary, for his labors of grief around the loss of his ancestral homeland. For Katal is not just a geological event or a periodic historical happening, but an explanatory device that enables Tamil labors of loss to connect the destructive actions of the ocean with the history of Tamil speakers as a singular community, and to the fortunes of a territory that is unambiguously identified as Tamil. The consequences of this nexus are many. It provides an opportunity for Tamil placemakers to imagine an antediluvian past for their beloved land and its inhabitants, and empowers them to tap into all the symbolic potency, innocence, purity, authenticity, and singularity associated with prelapsarian virtue. Katal also enables the writing of the history of the Tamil people and their territory in catastrophic terms. The tragedy of the catastrophe heightened by the fact that it was the uncontrollable forces of nature, as these manifested themselves in the ocean's fury, that caused the irrecoverable disappearance of the ancestral Tamil homeland. Strikingly, Tamil labors of loss around Lemuria do not single out the usual communities, such as Aryans, Brahmins, North Indians, Sanskrit and Hindi speakers, Muslims, or the British, who appear in other discursive realms as the principal enemies of the Tamil people. Instead, forces far beyond the control of mere mortals had wrought this catastrophic destruction. From this perspective, everything that had affected Tamil speakers and their territory and possessions in post-Lapsarian times pales in significance when compared with the catastrophic loss of the ancestral, antediluvial homeland and its cultural productions. David Shulman has observed that traditionally in the Tamil country, both the creative and violent aspects of the flood are typically underscored. Although Tamil placemakers find little that is redeeming in the Katal that catastrophically destroyed the Tamil prelapsarium, even they can see that it provides the occasion for remembering Tamil heroism as embodied in the Pandya kings, who battled the ocean and who valiantly salvaged their language from nature's fury. By establishing Kandam after Kandam in their new capitals, by providing succor to the poets and scholars who were members of these academies, and by nurturing works of Tamil literature. As in many pre-modern flood stories that circulated in the Tamil country, in Tamil devotions accounts of Katal as well, order, in the person of the king, replaces the inchoate powers of the ocean, and the flood provides the background to the dynastic foundation, or in other words, to a renewed creation. So, remembering Katal allows the placemaker to remind his fellow Tamil speakers of all that their language, their community, and their land had endured, and gives him an occasion to urge them to protect what remained after the catastrophic losses of the prelapsarian past. Notably, kings, not gods, as they do in other flood narratives, ultimately save the day. Divine intervention has no place in these secular labors of loss of the Tamil country. Of course, most critically, Katal allows Tamil devotion to write the history of the Tamil people and of their territory as a history of catastrophic and irrevocable loss. Loss, as I have insisted, is sustaining and empowering, even satisfying in the Tamil country, and Katal its enabling cause. So much so that K.P. Aravanan ingeniously suggests that the very name for the Tamil speaker, Tamilan, derives from the Tamil word amil, to submerge. In his reckoning, Tamilians are those people who survived submergence by the sea. They were named as such by their ancestors, so that they might remember this originary catastrophe. As I earlier noted, when the principle of isostasy was discovered in the middle of the 19th century, it soon posed a major problem for advocates in the metropole of sunken land bridges and submerged continents. By the early years of the 20th century, it had been accepted as geological orthodoxy, perhaps the most important reason that catastrophically drowned continents soon fell out of favor among most paleoscientists. Yet not surprisingly, up until today, Tamil labors of loss refuse to accept the prevalent geological theory that continental land masses are in isostatic equilibrium with ocean basins, and that it would be impossible for them to drown and vanish so catastrophically. This refusal is crucial and strategic, given the importance of the cataclysmic submergence of land for the politics of loss that sustains Tamil devotion. Katal, therefore, is put to a lot of hard work in Tamil labors of loss, operating as it does as event, explanatory device, and strategy. It allows Tamil placemakers to establish that their land, at least those parts of it that survived the diluvial catastrophe, is chosen and blessed. It is also invoked to account for why empirical proof of the primordiality of Tamil could not be proffered. Its antediluvian literary productions had literally been swept away in cataclysmic floods. As an explanatory device, it also establishes Tamil as the source of all other languages of the world. For was it not the tragic dispersal of its speakers from their original homeland that led to the peopling of the earth? Katal also helps to reconcile the new revelations of the modern sciences with the old truths of ancient Tamil literature. Not least, it is invoked to claim as part of the Tamil country, if only discursively, all manner of land masses from the earth's deep past that the paleosciences were making visible. Flood and destroy the antediluvian Tamil land. By and large, though, its placemakers are strangely sanguine about what provoked Katal, almost as if the ocean has a destructive mind of its own. Studies of flood stories from across the world note that, generally, the deluge is presented as an act of divine retribution in punishment for moral lapses among humans. Tamil labors of loss are singularly secular in this regard as well, for the ocean apparently needs no reason to rise up in anger against the hapless Tamil people, and to wreak havoc on their prized possessions. The ocean's unpredictability only heightens the tragedy of the loss visited upon the Tamil country. Tamil labors of loss may be centrally oriented around Katal, but there is surprisingly little consensus over the number of times the ocean boiled over and devoured the precious Tamil homeland. Some suggest that this might have happened just once. Others insist that the Pandyan kings were forced to shift their capital at least 3 times as a result of the 3 floods that hit their domain, first from Tenmaturai to Kapadapuram, and then briefly to Manalur, and finally to post-diluvial, northern Madurai. A large number concur with the commentator Nakirar's assessment of 2 catastrophic deluges, but there are others who refuse to enumerate at all, suggesting instead that an indeterminate number of inundations overcame the ancestral Tamil homeland and caused it to drown over time. As I noted earlier, there is a similar lack of consensus around the extent of the former homeland lost to Katal. But most of all, there is no agreement on when these floods happened. For Kumari Kandam's placemakers struggle to translate the deep geological time of the paleoscientist into the secular universal chronologies of disciplinary history, even while trying to reconcile both with a contrary Tamil devotional calendar, with its eccentric calibrations of a specifically Tamil past, reckoned in terms of the birth of the poet-sage Tiruvalluvar, and with an archaic mode of temporal reckoning, built around diluvial breakpoints called Uli, Skat Pralaya, which bring an end to periodic aeons, Tamra Yukam, Skat Yuga. One of the earliest attempts to assign a specific date was Savariroyan Pillai's in 1901, when he suggested that the Katal happened in the 15th century BCE soon after. Others hazarded dates ranging from as early as 30,000 BCE to as recently as the 3rd century BCE. Several turned to the English theosophist Scott Eliot's occult chronologies, in which floods periodically destroy large landmasses between 800,000 years ago and 9,654 BC. 19th century Orientalist attempts to date the Puranic flood, as well as the floods of the Buddhist canon, are also eclectically drawn upon, as are metropolitan attempts to date the Noachian deluge. However, as with attempts to enumerate the number of floods or to measure the land lost to Katal, several refuse to participate in the chronological exercise of dating, noting its futility, given that even the records of the Geological Survey of India do not help us in fixing the exact times of any of the epochal erosions, submergences, upheavals, or the like. Paleontological or stratigraphical evidence can only give us approximations of periods, ages, and horizons, and not actual centuries or years. So they resort to fuzzy temporalizing with phrases like once upon a time, long, long ago, in olden times, or several thousands of years ago. What then should we make of these epistemological struggles around Katal? Whence the imperative to enumerate the number of times the ocean struck, to measure the extent of the damage it caused, and most pressing of all, to temporalize its destructive bouts? I suggest that if occult labors of loss battle it out in the shade of the material sciences, Tamil labors of loss struggle in the shadow of professional history, which had emerged by the early years of the 20th century as the dominant knowledge form through which the past is reckoned and written about among those who deem themselves modern. This is not to say that academic history is a popular pedagogical subject, or that a modern historical consciousness, or historicism more generally, was disseminated widely among colonial Indians. Far from it. But it certainly means that history, by virtue of being a modern metropolitan science, becomes the ground on which all ways of remembering the past, ranging from the non-historical and the ahistorical to the historical, come to be progressively adjudicated for their truth value, as does the very idea of modern citizenship. It also means that a novel specialist, the historian, formally trained in the protocols of the discipline, emerges in this society that had hitherto been rather indifferent to its truths, sharing space with others who also took to the business of rethinking the past through the new device of history, even while living in and with other modes of reckoning. In Ashish Nandi's insightful characterization, historical consciousness now owns the globe. Even in societies known as ahistorical, timeless, or eternal, India for example, the politically powerful now live in and with history. Ahistoricity survives at the peripheries and interstices of such societies. Though millions of people continue to stay outside history, millions have dutifully migrated to the empire of history to become its loyal subjects. The historical worldview is now triumphant globally. The ahistoricals have become the dissenting minority. Occult labors of loss, I earlier proposed, had managed to clear for themselves some moments of freedom from the shackles of this empire of history, but Tamil placemakers are not so successful, as again and again the free play of an unabashed fabulous imagination, operating outside the usual range of facts, is compromised by the historicist demand for documented certitude, causal consistency, and especially for chronological precision and accuracy. As many a professional historian in the Tamil country intoned, the first essential to history is chronology. There can be no history without chronology. This was especially true when it came to matters dealing with ancient India, whose chronology is and will continue to be in an unsettled condition, and so afford ample room for patriotic megalomania and prejudiced micromania. As the litterateur and Tamil devotee P. Sundaram Pillai, 1855–97, observed in 1895 on the very eve of the commencement of the Tamil labors of loss around Lemuria, we have not, in fact, as yet, a single important date in the ancient history of the Dravidians, ascertained and placed beyond the pale of controversy. It is no wonder, then, that in the absence of such a sheet anchor, individual opinions drift, at pleasure, from the 14th century BC to the 14th century AD. Given this preoccupation with secular chronology, described as the eye of history, the pressure on Tamil labors of loss to date a momentous event like Katal is enormous, for only then would this all-important catastrophic event be taken seriously, especially by professional historians. But there is more to all this than contending with the historicist demand for chronological certitude and consistency. By the time the labors of loss around Lemuria commenced in the later half of the 19th century in Europe, the flood as a global geological event had become questionable in professional scientific circles, and from the 1840s, credible geologists or natural historians were disinclined to draw upon it to theorize the Earth's deep past. Not surprisingly, the paleoscientist never invokes the universal flood to account for submergence and subsidence in his labors of loss around Lemuria. It is another measure of occultism's contentious relationship with metropolitan science that leads its practitioners to turn to diluvial events in their own catastrophic labors of loss around Lemuria. But even occult placemaking does not accord them the centrality that is given them in Tamil devotion. As an explanatory device for global change as well, the flood had fallen on bad times among scientists in the metropole by the late 19th century. In contrast, it had been, from the Renaissance into the Enlightenment, the central moment in the drama of human history, to whose unveiling some of the best intellectual minds of Europe had dedicated themselves. But the professionalization of the various sciences in the 19th century had pushed the deluge to the margins of serious thought, where, dismissed as myth, legend, or fable, it languished as yet another example of the magical and miracle-mongering mentality of the pre-moderns. The flood, therefore, as a geological or historical event, or even as an explanatory device, had little credibility in disenchanted knowledge practices, history included, by the end of the 19th century. Yet, Katal remained the principal engine that sustained the labors of loss that are so important to Tamil devotion's placemaking, which commenced around this time. For the Tamil placemaker, it is crucial to establish its historicity, as it is to demonstrate that it had actually happened, at least once upon a time, if not more than once. The very crux of the Tamil project around Lemuria is to demonstrate that a Tamil antediluvium had really existed, and more importantly, had mattered. But how can the placemaker go about the business of reconstructing an antediluvial past in a post-Enlightenment age that is so vigorously antediluvial? How can he use the protocols and procedures of history to pursue an antediluvial project, especially in the face of that discipline's very hostility to such an enterprise? What are some of the gains of doing so? And what are some of the losses incurred in allowing himself to be commandeered by history? It is to these questions that I now turn as I explore Tamil devotion's complicated and tendentious relationship to the master discipline of history in 20th century India. To anticipate my principal argument, I suggest that Tamil labors of loss are compromised precisely because they can neither give full rein to an untrammeled fabulous imagination befitting, and indeed demanded by, the task of fantasizing about a prelapsarian time free of the shackles of history, nor can they afford to completely cater to the disenchanted expectations of that demanding discipline, with its dogmatic adherence to documenting what actually happened. The result is that these labors of loss are fatally suspended between pure fantasy and disciplinary history, satisfying the demands of neither, vulnerable to ridicule by both. Even as geology dismissed the Great Flood, even as history demanded evidence, the Tamil devotion to loss has endured, stubborn, poetic, and unshaken. Caught between scientific skepticism and historical exactitude, Tamil placemakers chose something else: to believe in what was taken. They kept alive the drowned world, through literature, through myth, through fierce emotional memory, as a way of resisting erasure and asserting presence. And maybe, in a world obsessed with proving what happened and when, the Tamil story reminds us of something deeper. That some histories don't live in dates or documents. They live in longing. They live in the ache of songs for a vanished shore, in the conviction that remembering is a form of survival. Because in the end, Katal isn't just about land lost to water. It's about a people who chose to build identity on the ruins beneath the sea and never let go.